Imagine a world where the very lifelines that feed your nation are under attack, hidden beneath dark, stormy waters. It is the early 1940s, and Britain faces one of its gravest threats. Nazi U-boats prowling the Atlantic, hunting merchant ships like predators in a deadly game. Their mission is clear: cut off supplies, cripple the economy, and starve a nation into submission. This is not just a battle of ships and submarines, it is a battle of minds, strategy, and resilience. German submariners, led by Karl Dönitz, pioneered the infamous wolf pack tactic. Each submarine could be dangerous on its own, but when coordinated as part of a pack, these vessels became nearly unstoppable, moving silently beneath the waves, communicating with precision, and striking together. They were capable of overwhelming even the best protected convoys. For the men aboard, each day was a delicate balance of stealth, skill, and courage. One wrong decision could mean disaster, yet success meant delivering a devastating blow to the enemy. The wolf pack was more than a tactic. It was a disciplined hunt, turning the vast Atlantic into a theater of tension and suspense. Across the ocean, however, Britain was far from defenseless. Behind offices, maps, and communication rooms, a quiet army of women in the Royal Naval Service known as the Wrens and the Sea Rangers worked tirelessly. They were not merely clerks or assistants. They were analysts, strategists, and communicators who interpreted enemy movements, calculated convoy positions, and ensured that Britain's lifelines had a fighting chance. Their work was largely unseen, yet it was crucial, shaping strategies that would save countless lives. These women demonstrated that courage and intelligence could change the course of events just as much as weapons of war. The stakes were immense. Each torpedo fired, each ship sunk, carried consequences far beyond numbers on a report. It meant lost lives, disrupted supplies, and fear-gripping communities. German U-boats could strike at any moment, yet Britain's intelligence and strategic planning created a counterbalance. The meticulous plotting of convoy movements, the analysis of enemy patterns, and the foresight of the Wrens all contributed to a defense system that allowed Britain to survive when defeat seemed imminent. This story is not merely about warfare. It is about survival, ingenuity, and the unsung heroes who made the impossible possible. From the depths of the Atlantic to the strategic rooms of Britain, every decision, every calculation mattered. While history often highlights battles won with torpedoes and guns, it is equally defined by those who work behind the scenes, turning intelligence and strategy into victory. If you are fascinated by untold stories of courage, strategy, and resilience during World War II, this is your invitation to discover them. Join us as we dive deep into the Atlantic, uncovering the secrets of the wolf packs, the brave men who faced them, and the extraordinary women whose work helped turn the tide. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell. This is the Battle of the Atlantic like you have never seen before. Karl Dönitz, a name that would become synonymous with the deadly efficiency of Germany's U-boat fleet, was a man of both vision and meticulous discipline, whose ideas would change the course of naval warfare forever. From the earliest days of his career, Dönitz observed that individual submarines, while formidable, were limited in what they could accomplish alone. The vastness of the Atlantic Ocean was both a challenge and an opportunity, a theater where a single vessel could be lost or go unnoticed, its impact muted unless part of a larger, coordinated effort. Dönitz recognized that to truly dominate the seas, submarines could not operate in isolation. They had to hunt as a group, moving in concert with one another, sharing information, and striking with precision at the heart of enemy convoys. This concept, which he would famously call the wolf pack, drew inspiration from both his experiences at sea and the natural world, where predators coordinate to maximize success, striking with stealth, timing, and relentless focus. The creation of the wolf pack concept was not merely a tactical innovation. It represented a profound shift in thinking about naval warfare. Dönitz spent countless hours poring over charts, analyzing convoy patterns, and studying the limitations of both his own fleet and that of the Allies. He understood that surprise was the most valuable weapon a submarine could wield, and that coordinated attacks would magnify the fear and confusion of merchant and naval vessels alike. No longer would submarines strike sporadically, risking exposure and minimal impact. Under Dönitz's system, they would move as a cohesive unit, each boat communicating secretly and positioning itself to converge on a target with devastating efficiency. Each Wolfpack operation required careful planning, from determining the number of submarines needed to track a convoy, to calculating the optimal angles of approach, to timing the simultaneous launch of torpedoes so that defenders would be overwhelmed and unable to respond effectively. It was a blend of strategy, psychology, and raw naval skill, demanding intelligence, courage, and a deep understanding of both the ocean and the enemy. Dönitz's ideas were born out of both necessity and ambition. After the First World War, Germany's naval capabilities had been severely restricted, and the submarine fleet was limited by the Treaty of Versailles. Yet Dönitz saw opportunity in the constraints, cultivating a new generation of officers who were disciplined, daring, and capable of thinking beyond traditional naval tactics. He trained them rigorously, emphasizing the importance of coordination, communication, and patience, as well as the ability to make rapid decisions under immense pressure. In his, every submarine captain had to be both a hunter and a strategist, capable of understanding the movements of the entire wolf pack while navigating the ever-changing and often hostile environment of the Atlantic. These lessons would prove invaluable when the outbreak of the Second World War offered Dönitz the chance to put his theories into practice. When war finally came, the Wolfpack concept was tested in the cold, merciless waters of the North Atlantic. Convoys carrying vital supplies to Britain became the lifelines of survival, and Dönitz's submarines sought to sever them with a precision that few had ever imagined possible. The Wolfpacks moved like shadows beneath the waves, invisible to radar and, for a time, nearly untouchable. The coordinated strikes created chaos among Allied ships, forcing them to scatter, defend, and sometimes abandon their cargo to survive. Each successful attack reinforced the potency of Dönitz's vision, demonstrating that the combined intelligence, discipline, and coordination of multiple submarines could achieve far more than any single vessel operating alone. Yet, the Wolf Pack was not just a weapon of destruction. It was a reflection of Dönitz's understanding that warfare required a blend of human ingenuity and teamwork, that the most effective strategies often relied on the seamless integration of many moving parts acting toward a common objective. What made Dönitz's approach truly remarkable was his attention to detail and adaptability. He understood that no plan could survive intact once it met the chaos of the real world, and he encouraged his commanders to think independently while adhering to the broader tactical framework. Each submarine acted as part of a living system, responding to developments in real time while maintaining the cohesion necessary for maximum impact. The Wolf Pack was as much a psychological weapon as a physical one. The fear of coordinated submarine attacks weighed heavily on Allied planners, forcing them to divert resources, alter convoy routes, and constantly anticipate the next strike. It was an invisible pressure that shaped the course of the war long before the torpedoes struck their targets. Through it all, Dönitz remained a figure of quiet intensity, always calculating, always observing, and always preparing for the next challenge. His innovation demonstrated that success in warfare depended not only on firepower but on foresight, coordination, and the ability to leverage collective action in pursuit of a strategic goal. The wolf-pack tactic became a defining feature of the Battle of the Atlantic, changing the nature of naval combat and illustrating how a single visionary commander, armed with strategy and determination, could amplify the effectiveness of his forces far beyond what might seem possible. In doing, Karl Dietz left an indelible mark on history, proving that intelligence, innovation, and disciplined execution could turn even the most challenging circumstances into opportunities for decisive action. Before Karl Dietz ever became the architect of Germany's most feared submarine strategy, his life was marked by a series of personal and professional losses that would shape his character and ultimately his approach to naval warfare. He was not born into greatness, nor was his path a smooth ascent. Early in his career, the young naval officer faced setbacks that would have discouraged many men. But in the crucible of hardship, he forged the patience and discipline that would later define him. His first taste of war came during the final years of the First World War, when he served aboard German submarines at a time when the Imperial Navy's U-boat arm was still in its infancy. The dangers of undersea combat were ever present. Mechanical failures, enemy depth charges, and the unrelenting threat of drowning far from shore. In 1918, his own submarine was attacked and forced to surface after sustaining critical damage. Captured by the Allies, he spent the remainder of the war as a prisoner. For a young officer eager to prove himself, captivity was a bitter humiliation. But in the silence of those prison walls he began to think deeply about strategy and the weaknesses of both friend and foe. This early defeat left a mark far deeper than simple disappointment. Dietz reflected on the circumstances that led to his capture and began to see patterns in naval warfare that others overlooked. He observed that German submarines of the First World War often operated as lone hunters, striking isolated ships but lacking the coordination to crush enemy supply lines on a larger scale. He imagined a future in which such vessels could act together as a single, deadly force. Yet these ideas did not emerge from ambition alone. They were born from the sting of failure and the recognition that improvisation and luck were not enough to win a prolonged battle at sea. His time in captivity taught him patience and careful observation, virtues that would later become central to the Wolfpack strategy he would champion decades later. When he returned to Germany after the war, he found a nation reeling from defeat and burdened by the Treaty of Versailles. The once proud navy was reduced to a shadow of its former strength. For Dietz, the professional losses continued. Ambitions of a swift rise through the ranks were tempered by the reality that the navy was constrained, its resources limited, and its officers often adrift in a climate of political turmoil. Yet where some saw only decline, he saw a challenge to be met with creativity. He devoted himself to the meticulous study of naval tactics, experimenting with new ideas even when resources were scarce. It was during these lean years that he sharpened the analytical mind that would later enable him to anticipate his enemy's moves and outthink rather than simply outgun his opponents. Personal grief also shadowed his journey. The interwar period was marked by private sorrows and the gradual erosion of the old order in which he had been trained. Friends and comrades were lost to the turbulence of the era, some to political upheaval, others to the lingering despair of a nation that felt betrayed by the outcome of the war. These losses deepened his resolve to find meaning in discipline and innovation. He became a man who understood that triumph was rarely the result of easy victories, but rather of endurance through adversity. Each personal setback hardened his belief that success would belong to those who could remain patient and plan with precision while others faltered. By the time the Second World War loomed, Dietz was no longer the young officer haunted by the humiliation of capture, but a seasoned strategist whose vision was shaped by those early wounds. He had transformed the bitterness of loss into a determination to create something entirely new in naval warfare. His Wolf-Pack concept submarines operating in coordinated groups to strike enemy convoys with overwhelming force was not merely a product of tactical genius. It was the culmination of years spent reflecting on how and why Germany had to fully exploit the potential of its submarines in the previous conflict. The memory of isolation at sea and the helplessness of being taken prisoner had convinced him that only through unity and coordination could his crews avoid the same fate. For him, the Atlantic was not simply an expanse of water to be crossed. It was a chessboard on which careful planning, timing, and teamwork would decide the fate of nations. The personal and professional losses of his early life did more than teach him strategy. They instilled in him a relentless focus on preparation and a belief that every weakness could be turned into strength. He demanded the same from the men he trained. He cultivated a culture of precision within the U-boat fleet, urging his officers to master not just their vessels but the art of anticipating their enemies' every move. Behind every bold attack lay the quiet lessons of his past, the captivity that taught him patience, the political chaos that taught him resilience, and the professional disappointments that forced him to think beyond conventional tactics. These experiences did not simply influence his later achievements. They defined them, shaping a commander who would leave an indelible mark on the history of naval warfare. In the dark and dangerous waters of the Atlantic, every decision would carry the weight of those early years. Dönitz' ability to transform personal loss into strategic innovation turned what could have been the end of a naval career into the beginning of a revolution in submarine tactics. His story reminds us that the most powerful ideas often rise not from moments of triumph, but from the quiet resolve forged in defeat. And it was this hard-earned wisdom that enabled him to lead his Wolf-Packs with a precision and daring that would challenge Britain's survival itself. While the world often remembers the thunder of guns and the shadows of submarines beneath the Atlantic, another story unfolded quietly behind the scenes, one in which courage and intellect proved just as vital to Britain's survival as firepower itself. Long before radar blips or sonar pings could detect a prowling U-boat, the Women's Royal Naval Service, known as the Wrens, and the Sea Rangers were already at work, their contributions woven into the very fabric of Britain's defence. Yet their stories were rarely told outside the walls of naval intelligence offices. These women were far more than assistants or clerks. They were the custodians of information, the interpreters of movement, the silent architects of strategies that would save countless lives. They handled charts, intercepted communications, and plotted convoy routes with a precision that rivaled the tactics of the very U-boat commanders who sought to outmaneuver them, transforming a country's nervous energy into disciplined action. In the bustling intelligence rooms, the Wrens moved with a quiet urgency that belied the magnitude of their work, translating coded messages and mapping enemy positions with a skill born from both training and instinct. Every line of text intercepted from the Luftwaffe or German naval networks was an opportunity to prevent disaster, and every plotted course could mean the difference between a convoy reaching Britain intact or being decimated in the middle of the ocean. Their work demanded not only technical proficiency but also remarkable mental resilience. The weight of responsibility was immense, and errors could cost lives. Yet these women worked tirelessly, their contributions largely invisible to the public eye. Their successes measured in lives saved and shipments preserved rather than headlines or medals. The Sea Rangers, a precursor to the modern concept of youth-oriented naval training, provided yet another layer to this intricate network of defense. They cultivated discipline, observational skill, and maritime knowledge among young women, ensuring that when the call to serve came, these recruits could step into critical roles with confidence and competence. Sea Rangers learned to navigate, interpret signals, and assist in communication tasks that were vital to the orchestration of convoy protections. Their efforts bridged the gap between civilian life and the formal naval structure, providing a foundation of readiness that allowed Britain to rapidly mobilize human intelligence resources at the outbreak of hostilities. The Wrens and Sea Rangers together formed an unseen, yet indispensable, shield, linking the intellect of the home front with the strategic execution of the Royal Navy at sea. Their contributions were not merely supportive but decisively strategic. In the darkest months of the Battle of the Atlantic, when German U-boats seemed almost invincible, the Wrens and Sea Rangers became the backbone of Britain's response. By tracking convoy movements, analyzing patterns of enemy attacks, and ensuring that communications flowed without error, they enabled commanders to anticipate the position of wolf packs and adjust defensive strategies accordingly. When a U-boat struck, it was often the intelligence work of these women that allowed reinforcements to converge or alternative routes to be plotted, mitigating losses that could have crippled the nation's supply lines. Their work exemplified the combination of diligence, foresight, and courage under pressure, qualities that proved as essential to survival as any battleship or torpedo. Beyond technical skill, these women brought a sense of resolve and ingenuity that transformed their roles from routine tasks into acts of heroism. They found creative solutions to logistical challenges, developed shorthand and coding systems to expedite communication, and maintained morale in environments that were often tense and under extreme scrutiny. Many had grown up inspired by earlier suffragist movements or the example of women serving in the First World War, and they carried forward a belief that intelligence, precision, and persistence could achieve results equal to any weapon. Their work demanded an understanding not only of the mechanics of naval operations but also of human behavior, anticipating how the enemy might react and preparing contingencies in advance. This combination of analytical prowess and practical insight made them indispensable collaborators in the fight to protect Britain's lifelines. Despite the enormity of their impact, the stories of the Wrens and Sea Rangers were often overshadowed by the more visible heroics of submariners and battleships. Yet without their meticulous plotting, careful observation, and relentless communication efforts, the tide of the Atlantic conflict could have swung decisively against Britain. They provided the invisible scaffolding upon which naval strategy was built, translating intelligence into action, and ensuring that the courage and tactical brilliance of those at sea could be effectively applied. In a war dominated by steel and torpedoes, these women proved that intellect, organization, and resilience were weapons in their own right, quietly shaping the outcome of battles that would determine the survival of a nation. Their legacy, though understated, endures as a testament to the vital role of unseen forces in moments of great peril, reminding us that courage is not always loud or celebrated, and that sometimes the most critical battles are fought not in the open waters, but in the minds and hands of those who prepare, calculate, and act with unwavering dedication. In the aftermath of the First World War, Germany was a nation bound by the chains of a treaty that left its people bitter and its military severely constrained. A country whose pride had been wounded and whose ambitions were stifled by the very powers that claimed victory. The Treaty of Versailles, intended to prevent future conflicts, imposed harsh limitations on the German armed forces, including a complete prohibition on submarines, a cornerstone of the naval strength that Nitz and his predecessors had once known. For many, this was more than a strategic setback. It was a humiliation, a blow to national pride that festered in the hearts of young officers and civilians alike, creating a climate ripe for both resentment and innovation. Karl Dönitz, emerging from the shadow of the First World War, understood both the frustration and the opportunity inherent in these restrictions. While the ban on submarines seemed an insurmountable obstacle, it also sparked in him a determination to develop strategies that would someday render the limitations irrelevant. strategies that would exploit ingenuity and coordination rather than brute force. During the interwar years, Germany's political and social environment was volatile, a nation in turmoil struggling to reconcile defeat with the desire to restore its former status. The Navy, once a symbol of national power, was reduced to a skeletal force, and officers who had dreamed of careers at sea were relegated to training, administration, or even unemployment. Dönitz himself experienced the frustration of this enforced dormancy, watching as other nations rebuilt and innovated while Germany's naval capabilities were curtailed. Yet these restrictions did not extinguish his ambitions. Rather, they forced him to think differently, to consider how submarines could be more than isolated hunters and instead operate as coordinated units capable of overwhelming a superior enemy. The seeds of the wolf pack tactic were sown in this environment of scarcity, where imagination and tactical insight were the only tools available to a man constrained by treaties and circumstance. As the 1920s and 1930s progressed, resentment among the German populace grew, fueled by economic hardship, political instability, and the sense that their nation had been unfairly punished. These sentiments were not lost on the military, and young officers like Dönitz found themselves operating in a context where national revival and rearmament were intertwined. The political climate gradually shifted, and by the early 1930s, the rise of Adolf Hitler brought with it promises to restore Germany's military might and overturn the perceived injustices of Versailles. Dönitz, who had spent years cultivating tactical knowledge and theoretical innovations under the constraints imposed on him, now found the opportunity to put his ideas into practice. The prohibition on submarines was lifted incrementally, first through clandestine development and training, then openly as Germany rearmed in defiance of international oversight. What had once been a limitation became a challenge to overcome, and Dönitz embraced it with a focus honed by years of anticipation. The story of Germany's rearmament and the resurrection of the U-boat program is inseparable from the broader social and political context of post-war resentment. Every naval treaty, every restriction, and every perceived slight added fuel to a nationalistic fervor that would later underpin Dönitz's authority to build and command his fleet. His vision for coordinated submarine warfare did not emerge in a vacuum. It was a response to the limitations and frustrations imposed by the world powers, an inventive solution to a problem that seemed impossible on paper. The Wolfpack tactic, which allowed multiple submarines to strike simultaneously with devastating effect, was in part a product of necessity, born from the knowledge that Germany could not match the Allied navies ship for ship, but could outthink them, outmaneuver them, and exploit the vulnerabilities of their merchant fleets. In this sense, the constraints of Versailles acted as a crucible, refining Dönitz's strategic thinking and forcing him to maximize efficiency, coordination, and psychological impact. By the mid-1930s, Germany's covert rearmament accelerated, and the foundations of the U-boat fleet were laid, carefully constructed in anticipation of a conflict that would test the limits of every tactical innovation Dönitz had conceived. He trained officers, refined Wolfpack maneuvers, and ensured that every aspect of the program emphasized both coordination and flexibility. Lessons learned from years of limitation and observation. The post-war restrictions, which had been intended to curb Germany's naval ambitions, had inadvertently created the conditions for a generation of highly disciplined and innovative commanders who would challenge the might of the Allied fleets. Dönitz's careful cultivation of talent, combined with the nation's thirst for military resurgence, transformed what might have been a minor naval force into a formidable tool capable of threatening Britain's lifelines in the Atlantic. The convergence of national resentment, political change, and personal determination thus set the stage for the Battle of the Atlantic, where Dönitz's U-boats would operate with unprecedented coordination and lethality. The obstacles imposed by Versailles had not stifled innovation. Instead, they had sharpened it, forcing a new kind of naval strategy to emerge, one that relied not on numerical superiority but on intelligence, timing, and collaboration. By the outbreak of the Second World War, Dönitz had built a program that married strategic foresight with practical training, ready to implement the Wolfpack tactics that would define submarine warfare and bring the Atlantic Ocean into a deadly new focus. His story demonstrates how limitations, when met with vision and resolve, can catalyze ingenuity, transforming a period of suppression and frustration into a foundation for revolutionary tactics that would echo through the history of naval conflict. In the years leading up to the full outbreak of the Second World War, Britain's naval command faced a daunting challenge: the spectre of German U-boats prowling the Atlantic, threatening the lifelines that connected the island nation to its allies and vital supplies. While the world would later come to associate naval heroism with the dramatic engagements at sea, much of the preparation and ingenuity occurred far from the ocean waves. In classrooms, tactical rooms, and laboratories where minds worked tirelessly to anticipate the enemy's moves. Among those who would leave an indelible mark on the course of naval warfare was Commander Gilbert Roberts, a man whose dedication to preparation, analysis, and innovation would prove crucial in countering the deadly threat posed by the Wolfpacks orchestrated by Karl Dönitz. Roberts understood that victory at sea was not merely a matter of guns and torpedoes, but of information, anticipation, and the rigorous testing of ideas before they met the chaos of battle. Roberts' approach combined the rigor of methodical study with the creativity of simulation, recognizing that the unpredictable nature of war required preparation that could adapt to every contingency. He employed war games, an early form of strategic simulation, to recreate the naval engagements of the First World War, including the lessons of battles such as Jutland, and to explore new tactics that could counter the growing threat of submarines. These war games were not mere exercises. They were intensive mental laboratories where the principles of maneuver, detection, and coordination could be tested and refined without risk to life or vessel. Within these controlled environments, Roberts could observe patterns, anticipate enemy behavior, and identify weaknesses that might not be immediately apparent in traditional training exercises. He understood that a single miscalculation could have catastrophic consequences, and he devoted himself to ensuring that every strategy was scrutinized from multiple angles. A critical component of Roberts' innovation was the use of ASDIC, the early sonar technology that allowed ships to detect submerged submarines by emitting sound pulses and interpreting the echoes. While primitive by today's standards, ASDIC represented a revolutionary step forward in anti-submarine warfare, providing commanders with a tool that could extend their awareness beneath the surface of the water, where U-boats could strike unseen. Roberts integrated this technology into his war games, experimenting with different formations, depths, and approaches to maximize the effectiveness of detection and countermeasures. By combining ASDIC with simulated convoy movements and hypothetical Wolfpack attacks, he could train officers and crews to respond swiftly and decisively, turning theoretical knowledge into practical, actionable tactics. In this way, the laboratory of the war game became a proving ground where human ingenuity and technological innovation converged to meet the growing menace across the Atlantic. The impact of Roberts' work was amplified by his attention to detail and his insistence on realism in training. He incorporated intelligence reports, shipping patterns, and known U-boat tactics into his exercises, ensuring that simulations mirrored the complexities and unpredictability of real-world operations. Officers under his guidance learned not only to detect submarines, but also to anticipate their strategies, to interpret subtle cues, and to make decisions under pressure, building the mental agility necessary for survival in the unforgiving environment of the Atlantic. Roberts encouraged questioning, adaptation, and the exploration of unconventional tactics, fostering a culture of innovation that would allow the Royal Navy to stay one step ahead of Denitz's commanders, whose Wolfpack strategies depended on coordination, surprise, and the exploitation of vulnerabilities in Allied convoy defenses. As the war began, the training and preparations undertaken under Roberts' guidance were put to the ultimate test. Convoys that crossed the Atlantic carried not only critical supplies but the hopes and survival of a nation, and every engagement with a U-boat tested the efficacy of his methods. ASDIC-equipped vessels, guided by officers trained in simulated encounters and tactical experimentation, could detect submerged threats earlier. Coordinate counterattacks, and protect merchant ships that otherwise might have been easy prey. Roberts' insistence on rigorous preparation and innovative thinking allowed the Royal Navy to develop a flexible, responsive approach that could adjust to the evolving tactics of the German U-boat fleet, mitigating losses and gradually turning the tide in the Battle of the Atlantic. His work exemplified the interplay between foresight and action, between theoretical understanding and practical application, demonstrating that the mind could be as formidable a weapon as any gun or torpedo. Throughout this period, Roberts' contributions extended beyond technical innovation. He cultivated a mindset of analytical vigilance and creative problem-solving within the Royal Navy, embedding in officers a capacity to anticipate, adapt, and respond with precision under stress. The combination of ASDIC technology, meticulously designed war games, and an emphasis on strategic thinking transformed the Royal Navy from a reactive force into one capable of proactive defense and calculated offense, countering the lethal efficiency of Denitz's wolf packs. In a war dominated by hidden threats beneath the waves, it was this careful preparation, this commitment to training and technological integration, that gave Britain a critical edge, demonstrating that even in the face of relentless danger, intellect, strategy, and innovation could shape the outcome of conflict and preserve the lifelines upon which a nation depended. As the U-boat campaign in the Atlantic intensified, the human cost of submarine warfare became tragically evident, revealing not only the strategic stakes, but also the profound civilian suffering that accompanied the conflict. The sinking of vessels such as the Athenian passenger liner and the battleship Royal Oak stands as stark reminders that war at sea was never limited to military confrontation alone. It carried consequences that reverberated far beyond the decks of naval vessels and the corridors of command. Each torpedo that struck a ship was more than a tactical maneuver. It represented lives abruptly ended, families shattered, and communities plunged into grief, highlighting the psychological weight borne by those on both sides of the conflict. The Athenian, carrying hundreds of refugees and innocent civilians, became an unintended stage for the lethal capabilities of the U-boat fleet. Its destruction a harrowing testament to the vulnerability of non-combatants caught in the maelstrom of global warfare. The incident shocked the world, reminding commanders and citizens alike that the lines between military necessity and human tragedy could blur in the most devastating ways. The Royal Oak, stationed at Scapa Flow, was meant to symbolize strength and security, a bastion of Britain's naval power that reassured sailors and civilians alike of their nation's maritime dominance. Yet the attack on this battleship demonstrated how even the most formidable vessels could be vulnerable to stealth, planning, and the relentless efficiency of Denitz's wolf packs. The explosion of torpedoes against the Royal Oak not only claimed the lives of over 800 British servicemen but also delivered a psychological blow to a nation already grappling with the looming threat of invasion and supply shortages. Survivors recounted the chaos and terror, the suddenness of destruction, the horrifying scene of comrades swept away into the cold Atlantic, and the lingering sense of helplessness that haunted those who lived to tell the tale. For the British public, the sinking undermined confidence in the invincibility of the Royal Navy and underscored the stakes of the Battle of the Atlantic. revealing that the war's front lines extended far beyond visible battlefields, reaching into the hearts and minds of ordinary people dependent on the safety of maritime transport. In both incidents, the human stories illuminate the complex interplay between strategy and consequence. Submariners, following orders and executing tactics honed through years of preparation, often face their own burdens of guilt and moral ambiguity. De Nitz and his commanders, while focused on achieving operational objectives, could not entirely escape awareness of the lives affected by their decisions, a reality that layered every engagement with psychological complexity. On the other side, officers like Commander Gilbert Roberts, whose work in anti-submarine warfare sought to mitigate such losses, confronted the tangible evidence of what failure could mean. Lives lost, morale shaken, and the enduring trauma of witnessing destruction on an unprecedented scale. The sinking of the Athenian and the Royal Oak exemplifies how technological prowess and tactical mastery, while essential for victory, carried with them profound ethical and emotional consequences, challenging all involved to reconcile the imperatives of war with the value of human life. The civilian toll also extended beyond immediate casualties. News of such sinkings rippled through communities, instilling fear and uncertainty among those reliant on maritime commerce and transport. Families of those aboard ships grappled with anxiety and the unpredictable nature of survival, while communities dependent on imported food, fuel, and resources confronted the specter of shortages exacerbated by the effectiveness of the U-boat campaign. In ports and coastal towns across Britain, the psychological strain manifested in heightened vigilance, rationing measures, and an acute awareness that the distant battles in the Atlantic directly affected the home front. This connection between naval operations and civilian experience emphasized the totality of modern warfare, where victory was measured not only in tons of shipping sunk or ships protected, but in the capacity to sustain morale and ensure the continuity of daily life amidst ongoing danger. The Athenian tragedy also highlighted the challenges of distinguishing between military and civilian targets, a problem compounded by the fog of war and the necessity for submarine commanders to act decisively under limited information. Despite regulations intended to safeguard non-combatants, errors and misjudgments occurred, and the consequences were immediate and harrowing. For survivors, the experience left indelible scars, while for naval officers, it underscored the ethical weight carried in every engagement. The Royal Oak, by contrast, demonstrated how even strategically critical military assets could serve as unintended instruments of psychological warfare, where the mere loss of a vessel reverberated across national consciousness, shaking confidence and amplifying the sense of vulnerability that pervaded Britain during the darkest months of the conflict. As the Battle of the Atlantic continued, these incidents served as both cautionary tales and motivational touchstones. Commanders and crews alike recognized that each engagement carried the potential to shape not only operational outcomes but also public perception, morale, and the enduring memory of the conflict. The emotional resonance of such tragedies fostered a sense of urgency and determination among those tasked with protecting convoys, defending ports, and countering the U-boat threat. Compelling innovation, vigilance, and coordination on an unprecedented scale, the psychological dimension of warfare fear, resilience, grief, and determination interwove with tactical considerations, shaping decisions at every level and reminding all involved that the human cost of strategic action was inseparable from the pursuit of victory. Ultimately, the sinkings of the Athenian and the Royal Oak illustrate that submarine warfare, while a matter of strategy, tonnage, and technological mastery, was inseparable from human experience. Each torpedo struck carried weight beyond the material, embedding tragedy into the narrative of the Battle of the Atlantic and leaving lasting imprints on both participants and observers. They reveal a dimension of war that transcends maps and reports, a sphere in which the psychological toll, the grief of loss, and the endurance of those affected are as consequential as the military outcomes themselves, underscoring the profound and often overlooked cost of a conflict waged beneath the waves. The struggle to protect and maintain the flow of merchant shipping during the Battle of the Atlantic was not merely a matter of military pride or naval tactics. It was a fight for the very survival of Britain, a battle in which every ship lost or saved could tip the balance between sustenance and starvation, hope and despair. Britain, an island nation heavily dependent on imported goods, relied on the steady arrival of food, fuel, and raw materials to sustain its population and its war effort. And the German U-boat campaign, orchestrated with ruthless efficiency by Karl Nitz, sought to sever that lifeline with devastating precision. Each convoy that set sail across the North Atlantic carried not just supplies, but the fragile promise of continued resilience for a nation under siege. And the outcome of these engagements reverberated far beyond the decks of warships, affecting the day-to-day survival of ordinary families and the psychological fabric of a society under threat. The effectiveness of the Wolf-Pack tactics, in which groups of U-boats coordinated attacks on convoys, magnified the danger exponentially. Merchant vessels, often lightly armed and slow-moving, became vulnerable targets, their cargoes representing weeks or even months of accumulated resources for an entire country. The loss of a single freighter meant more than a numerical reduction in shipping tonnage. It meant communities could face shortages. Hospitals might run low on medical supplies, bakeries could struggle to provide bread, and families might confront the stark reality of rationing under increasingly severe conditions. Conversely, successfully defending these convoys required coordination, vigilance, and the implementation of innovative anti-submarine strategies developed through the meticulous work of officers like Commander Gilbert Roberts, whose use of ASDIC technology and war games trained crews to anticipate and counter the stealthy maneuvers of Nitz's submariners. Every tactical success in protecting a convoy was a victory measured not just in ships and tonnage, but in the preservation of human life and the sustenance of a nation teetering on the brink of scarcity. As U-boats prowled the vast expanses of the Atlantic, the stakes were immediate and tangible. Reports of sunk freighters sent shockwaves through naval command and civil authorities, prompting urgent recalculations of supply lines, convoy schedules, and defensive resources. The psychological impact on the civilian population was profound, as news of attacks reached home through newspapers, radio broadcasts, and letters from those serving at sea. People understood that the very bread on their tables, the coal in their fires, and the essential materials for industry were directly threatened by the outcome of these engagements. This awareness instilled both fear and determination, galvanizing public support for naval operations while underscoring the urgency of technological innovation. Tactical ingenuity and disciplined coordination among escort vessels and merchant crews. The survival of Britain, therefore, became inseparable from the successful management of maritime logistics, with every sinking or defense shaping the capacity of the nation to endure, resist, and ultimately prevail. The Royal Navy's strategies evolved in response to these pressures, integrating intelligence from intercepted communications, reconnaissance reports, and observations from those on the front lines of convoy escort duty. Officers and crew members internalized the knowledge that failure could translate directly into hardship for millions ashore, forging a sense of purpose that transcended conventional notions of military duty. Protecting a freighter laden with food or industrial supplies became as critical as engaging the enemy in traditional combat. And each convoy escort was a microcosm of the larger struggle for national survival. The meticulous planning that went into convoy formations, the careful timing of departures, and the layered defense provided by escort ships equipped with ASDIC and depth charges exemplified a holistic approach to warfare, in which operational decisions were inseparably linked to the material and psychological well-being of the civilian population. Conversely, Dönitz strategy sought to exploit vulnerabilities in these logistical lifelines, aiming to sink enough merchant shipping to bring Britain to its knees, inducing shortages that could demoralize the population and force political concessions. Each successful U-boat attack was measured not only in tonnage destroyed but in its ripple effect on supply chains. Civilian morale and the nation's ability to continue fighting. The psychological burden on sailors, merchants, and military planners was compounded by the knowledge that their efforts or failures had direct consequences for families waiting ashore, for children dependent on rationed food, and for hospitals and industries crucial to the war effort. The Atlantic became a theater not merely of naval engagement but of existential stakes, where the ebb and flow of supplies mirrored the fortunes of the nation itself. Stories from the convoys illustrate this vividly. Crews braving storms, navigating treacherous waters, and confronting the ever-present threat of torpedoes understood that each successful voyage meant sustaining communities, providing fuel and food, and maintaining morale back home. Similarly, the loss of ships left tangible scars, prompting urgent rationing, emergency measures, and the mobilization of alternative supply routes. Civilian life and military operations were intricately intertwined, with the fate of convoys directly influencing daily existence across Britain. These engagements were therefore not abstract strategic contests. They were battles with real-world consequences for millions, where the successful coordination of defense measures and the prevention of sinkings translated directly into survival and continuity for a nation under siege. In essence, the struggle over merchant shipping during the Battle of the Atlantic exemplified the intimate link between military action and civilian well-being, demonstrating that naval warfare extended far beyond tactics and tonnage calculations. It was a contest in which the outcome determined food security, industrial capability, and national morale, reminding all involved that the seas were as much a lifeline as a battlefield. Every decision, every maneuver, and every engagement had tangible consequences for the survival of Britain, embedding a profound human dimension into the strategic calculus of war and underscoring the reality that victory depended as much on safeguarding resources as on defeating the enemy. The success in either sinking or defending merchant shipping became a measure of national resilience, and the efforts of those on both sides of the Atlantic were forever intertwined with the fate of a nation fighting for its very existence. The fall of France in the summer of 1940 marked a turning point not only in the broader conflict of World War II, but also in the operational capabilities of the German U-boat fleet, an event that dramatically altered the strategic landscape of the Battle of the Atlantic. Prior to this conquest, German submarines were constrained by limited access to ports on the Atlantic seaboard, forcing them to operate from home bases in the North Sea and Baltic, where logistical challenges and geographic limitations restricted their range, duration, and overall effectiveness. The rapid and decisive defeat of France, achieved through the terrifying efficiency of blitzkrieg tactics, suddenly opened a wealth of strategically valuable ports along the western coast of Europe, from Brest and Lorient to Saint Nazaire, providing the Kriegsmarine with unprecedented opportunities to project power deeper into the Atlantic. These ports, with their natural harbors and established naval infrastructure, became gateways for U-boats to move quickly into vital shipping lanes, striking at British merchant convoys with greater frequency, coordination, and reach than ever before, and bringing the threat of starvation and disruption directly to the British Isles. The impact of these newly acquired bases was immediate and profound. German commanders, led by Karl Dönitz, could now deploy U-boats in organized wolf packs with the confidence that refueling, resupply, and maintenance could be conducted close to the operational theater rather than across the perilous distances from the North Sea. This logistical advantage allowed for sustained patrols, more aggressive pursuit of convoys, and the ability to maintain pressure on British maritime supply lines without the previous constraints that had limited operational tempo. From the perspective of Allied planners, the expansion of U-boat access to French Atlantic ports presented a daunting challenge, as previously secure stretches of ocean became hunting grounds for submarines, and the long-established convoy systems had to adapt quickly to the new threat environment. The fall of France thus transformed not only the geography of war, but the very dynamics of naval strategy, forcing Britain to contend with a more agile, far-reaching, and deadly submarine threat. Beyond the immediate operational advantages, the psychological ramifications of the French ports' availability were significant for both sides. For the Germans, the capture of these ports represented not just a logistical boon, but a symbolic victory, a tangible demonstration of the effectiveness of their rapid conquest, and a morale booster for U-boat crews embarking on extended missions in the Atlantic. For the British, the knowledge that enemy submarines now had safe harbors on the Western European coast added a sense of vulnerability and urgency, as even the most carefully planned convoys faced the possibility of interception far from the protective reach of escort vessels. Commanders like Gilbert Roberts and the teams of plotters and analysts within the Royal Navy had to grapple with this new reality, recalculating convoy routes, coordinating patrols over vast expanses of ocean, and attempting to anticipate the movements of U-boat wolf packs whose operational radius had been dramatically extended by the fall of France. Every planning session, every intelligence briefing, carried with it the awareness that the enemy's reach had grown, and that the stakes for Britain's survival, its food, fuel, and civilian morale had never been higher. The U-boat crews themselves experienced the practical benefits of the new ports in ways that shaped the rhythm and intensity of the Atlantic campaign. Resupply could occur with greater speed, repairs could be conducted onshore rather than at sea, and missions could be launched with reduced risk of running low on fuel or torpedoes far from friendly territory. The ability to base submarines along the French coast allowed Dönitz to concentrate forces, coordinate attacks, and refine the wolf pack tactics that had proven so devastating in previous engagements. Groups of U-boats could be deployed to intersect convoy routes at optimal points, using intelligence gathered through reconnaissance, intercepted communications, and prior engagements to maximize impact while minimizing exposure. The operational flexibility granted by these ports meant that Dönitz's strategic vision of a submarine fleet capable of strangling Britain's maritime lifelines could be pursued with unprecedented efficiency, making the Atlantic not just a theater of war but a crucible in which the survival of a nation hung in the balance. The interplay between geographic advantage and tactical innovation also became evident as German forces leveraged French ports to implement coordinated multi-boat attacks with precision timing. Convoys moving from North America to Britain now faced threats at multiple points along their route, with U-boats emerging from bases previously out of reach to execute flanking maneuvers, cut off escape routes, and overwhelm escort vessels. The combination of local knowledge, refueling convenience, and proximity to critical shipping lanes allowed for a scale of operations that had been unattainable when submarines were limited to northern European bases. Each successful interception not only sank vital tonnage but demonstrated the cumulative effect of strategic foresight, geographic exploitation, and tactical mastery, further intensifying the pressure on Britain's ability to sustain itself during a period of existential vulnerability. From the British perspective, the fall of France was therefore not merely a territorial loss, but a strategic complication that reshaped the conduct of the Battle of the Atlantic. Every merchant ship that sailed the treacherous ocean faced heightened risk, and the protective measures developed by the Royal Navy, including the convoy system, technological advances like ASDIC, and the deployment of highly trained crews, had to be recalibrated in light of the expanded U-boat threat. Intelligence efforts. Careful plotting and coordination across multiple naval commands became critical to ensuring that convoys could reach their destinations, and that Britain's fragile supply lines remained intact. The psychological weight of knowing that enemy submarines could now strike with greater reach and coordination added urgency to these defensive measures, highlighting how the conquest of France had ripple effects far beyond the immediate battlefield and into the very sustenance and morale of a nation under siege. In essence, Germany's conquest of France provided the Kriegsmarine with an unparalleled strategic platform, enabling Dönitz to extend his U-boat operations across the Atlantic with unprecedented range, coordination, and lethality. The combination of newly acquired ports, enhanced logistical capacity, and tactical innovation transformed the Atlantic into a theater of intense and sustained submarine warfare, threatening Britain's survival and testing the ingenuity, courage, and resilience of all those involved in defending the island nation's lifelines. The fall of France thus serves as a critical inflection point in the story of the Battle of the Atlantic, illustrating how geography, military conquest, and operational planning intersected to shape the fate of nations and the course of the war. As the Battle of the Atlantic raged on, the story of Britain's survival became a testament not only to the strategies of high command and the power of technology, but also to the courage, ingenuity, and determination of countless individuals whose contributions often went unrecognized. The relentless threat of German U-boats, operating with deadly coordination from Atlantic ports captured after the fall of France, created a scenario in which every merchant ship, every convoy, and every naval escort could spell the difference between life and deprivation. Yet despite the constant peril, Britain endured, and much of that endurance rested upon the quiet, persistent efforts of people working behind the scenes, particularly women who served in the Women's Royal Naval Service Wrens, Sea Rangers, and other support roles. Their work in intelligence gathering, communications, plotting convoy routes, and analyzing enemy movements provided the backbone for operational decisions, allowing Allied forces to anticipate attacks, protect convoys, and adapt to the evolving tactics of Karl Dönitz and his wolf packs. These unsung heroes displayed extraordinary innovation under pressure. They deciphered coded messages, tracked U-boat movements, and coordinated complex tactical responses that saved thousands of lives and millions of tons of essential supplies. Women like Vera Lan Matthews and her contemporaries in the Wrens not only broke through social conventions but became indispensable to the naval effort, proving that intelligence, discipline, and foresight were as critical to victory as firepower and sheer numbers. Their ability to process information quickly, understand patterns, and provide actionable intelligence meant that commanders could deploy convoys with greater confidence, avoid the most dangerous U-boat zones, and mount counterattacks when necessary. Without these efforts, the Allies' capacity to defend Britain's lifelines would have been severely compromised, and the very survival of the nation might have hung in the balance. Alongside intelligence and innovation, courage played a pivotal role at every level of the struggle. Sailors and merchant mariners faced the constant threat of torpedoes, storms, and the unforgiving Atlantic Ocean, yet they pressed forward, understanding that their perseverance directly affected the food security, fuel supply, and morale of millions at home. Each successful voyage was a triumph against both the enemy and the elements, and each loss underscored the human cost of war. The bravery of these individuals, combined with the analytical work of the Wrens and other support personnel, created a synergy that allowed Britain to endure one of the most existential threats it had ever faced. Technological innovation further amplified these human efforts. Early sonar systems like ASDIC, depth charges, and tactical war games refined by officers such as Commander Gilbert Roberts provided tools that could counteract the formidable U-boat threat. These innovations, combined with the meticulous planning and coordination made possible through intelligence efforts, enabled the Royal Navy to adapt to DNIT's evolving tactics, such as night surface attacks and coordinated wolf pack strikes. Each success, each convoy safely reaching port, was not merely a victory at sea, but a victory for the nation's very survival, a reinforcement of the idea that strategy, preparation, and courage could overcome even the most determined adversary. As the months and years passed, the combined efforts of all participants' naval officers, intelligence officers, plotters, and support staff gradually turned the tide of the Atlantic campaign. DNIT's wolfpacks, once seemingly invincible, began to encounter carefully orchestrated defenses, strategic counterattacks, and coordinated convoy escorts that blunted their effectiveness. The story of Britain's survival during this period is therefore a story of resilience, collaboration, and the often overlooked contributions of those who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, demonstrating that victory is seldom the result of one person's actions, but the culmination of many working in concert toward a common goal. In reflecting on this epic struggle, it becomes clear that the lessons of the Battle of the Atlantic extend beyond naval warfare. They speak to the power of ingenuity, the value of intelligence and planning, and the profound impact of courage in the face of adversity. They remind us that every role, no matter how hidden or seemingly minor, can be decisive in shaping the outcome of events, and that collective effort, when guided by strategy and determination, can sustain a nation even in its darkest hours. The Wrens, Sea Rangers, sailors, and support teams exemplify this principle, showing that commitment, foresight, and bravery are as essential to survival as any weapon or technology. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through one of history's most perilous chapters, and for taking the time to appreciate the stories of those whose contributions were critical yet often overlooked. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth explorations of history's pivotal moments. Your support helps us continue to bring these fascinating stories to life, highlighting the lessons and legacies that continue to resonate today. Sleep well tonight, and may you dream of courage, resilience, and the indomitable spirit of those who fought so that Britain and its people could endure. Good night.